Hello, in this video we're going to go through learning target 431, which is to calculate our measures of center and spread, which are mean, median, mode, range, standard deviation. So measures of spread is what we're going to start with, which is basically like how spread out your data is. So the range measures the overall spread of the data set. And so to calculate that, you simply take your highest value and you subtract your lowest value. If there's a bigger range, it means there's a bigger spread. The other measure of spread is the standard deviation, which may be new to you this year, but it's really, really important. And so we're going to practice the standard deviation quite a bit. So the standard deviation measures the average distance from the mean of the data set, so like the middle, the average, to any point in the set. So the average distance from the middle to a point in the set. So how far away is the data from the middle? So a larger standard deviation would mean that your values are more spread out from the middle, and a smaller standard deviation would mean that they're closer together. So there's not much difference in the values that you're given. So for example, if a lot of people get the same score on a test, if everyone gets between a 75 and a 78, there's going to be a small standard deviation because there's not much difference in the values that are given. However, if we do our test scores and there are people who got zeros up to hundreds and it's really, really spread out, we'll have a higher standard deviation. So this is just kind of an example to explain what standard deviation is and what it means. So let's say we're talking about the average height of men in the United States. So the average height of men is 70 inches. So that is in the middle. That's our average. And the following things are true if we assume a normal data set, which we'll talk about later, but we can assume these things are true for now. One is that 68% is within one standard deviation of the mean. So one standard deviation is 3 inches. That means that 68% of the population is between 73 inches and 67 inches. So standard deviation tells you like how far to move essentially. And so if I'm asking you for one standard deviation away, you just add it or subtract it from the middle. So if our standard deviation is 3, that means 68% of people or men are within this height. Then 95% are within 2 standard deviations, which is 6 inches of the average. So again, we're going to go one more standard deviation out. So this is 76 and this is 64. And that means 95% of the population of men in the United States are between these two heights. And lastly, essentially everyone except a few outliers are within 3 standard deviations, which is 9 inches. So again, we go 3 inches out, that's 79 inches here and 61 inches here. So essentially it's 99.7, but essentially all of the population is within 3 standard deviations. And these numbers don't change. These percentages right here, those stay the same. What will change is your average, so whoever your middle is, and then how big your standard deviation is. Again, if all the test scores are pretty small, then the standard deviation will be really small, so you only count by like 0.2s or 0.5s. But if there's a big variation in the test scores, you might count by 10 full points either way. This other part is mode, which is not actually a measure of spread, but it doesn't really fit in any category. It's kind of its own thing. So this is the value that is most common. So whatever pops up the most. And again, it's not really a measure of spread or center, just helpful sometimes. So now let's talk about our measures of center, which are mean and median. So the mean is the average value in a data set. And basically you add up all your values and divide by the number of them. This should only be used when the values have a small spread and there are no outliers. We'll talk more about this later as well, but it's good to know that piece of information. So if there are any outliers, you can't use the mean. Outliers are just weird values. So if almost everyone gets a 75, between a 75 and 80 on a test, and only one person gets a 20%, that's an outlier. The median is the middle value of the data set. When it's ordered least to greatest, if there are two middle values, you average them. And this is what you use if there are outliers. So mean when there's not any outliers, median when there is. So you can go ahead and pause this if you need any of the writing on there. And we're going to go ahead and see what this looks like in an actual practice problem. So to do this, we're not going to calculate these by hand because we have graphing calculators and it's much easier to graph in the calculator. So you don't need to write anything down here, but these are going to help you with your calculator. So we are going to enter our data into a list first. These are the buttons that you need to hit, which I'll show you in a second. You enter all your items and then you calculate one var stats, which is one variable statistics, using these buttons. And then this is what your screen will give you, and it tells you what all these pieces mean. There's some extra pieces we don't care about, which is fine. So let's look at what this is actually going to look like. So I'm going to do this example, and then you'll do the U-try. So this says to find each of the following measures of center and spread of the study time. So I'm just going to use the study time, which is this first row, and I'm going to type that into my calculator. So we are going to hit second and the stat button where there says list above. Oops, nope, I lied. We're going to go to stat and edit. Sorry about that. Stat and edit. So we can edit our lists. If your list, there's already things in there, you want to go up to highlight the name of the list and clear them out. And then you can start fresh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter all of the data points for the study time. So I'm going to hit 2, enter, 4, enter. And then you go through the entire list. If a number shows up more than once, you type it more than once. When you get to the end, you are done with your list. So then we are going to calculate our statistics. So we're going to hit stat again. And instead of in this edit button, we're going to go over to calc. And we're going to hit one var stats, which is the first one. You want to make sure the name of the list that you used is correct. So I typed in L1, which is the first one. So it should say L1. You don't need to type anything here. And you just keep hitting enter until it calculates. So now here are the important pieces. So again, I have this like cheat sheet up here that'll tell you what each of them mean. So the average comes first, which is our mean, and that's this X with the bar over it. So that would be 3.25. Then our median is down here. So it says MED. So I'm going to scroll down. MED 3.5. My standard deviation is up here. So it looks like this, SX. There's two standard deviations, one of the population and one of the sample. We want to use the one with the population. Okay, so the SX. So my SX is this number here. You can round to 2 decimal places, or we'll just do 1 decimal place for right now. So 1.4. Our range, there is no range on here. However, you can find the range by taking your maximum value and your minimum value and subtracting them. So I'm going to do that last because I'm going to do that in my calculator. And then mode is also not on here, but we can see what number pops up the most. So I see that there are 3 4s, and that is the most that anything shows up. So that's our mode. And our range, I'm going to take my maximum value, which is 5, and my minimum value, and I'm going to subtract them. So 5 minus 1 gives me 4. And then I'm going to ask you to interpret the standard deviation. So what does a standard deviation mean? And you can use this setup for a sentence every single time. So the standard deviation means the average distance from the mean of 3.25, my mean is 3.25, is 1.4 hours. So the average distance from the mean of 3.25 is 1.4 hours. So essentially what that's saying is most people are within that bracket. If you add 1.4 hours and subtract 1.4 hours, the majority of people spent time studying in there. And you can say this every time, the average distance from the mean, and then tell me what the mean is, and then give me your standard deviation. So I want you to do this one. You're going to have to go back and clear your list and then do your second row, the grade percentage, because yours is about the grade. Find these and then unpause it to see the answers. And here we go. So I have my answers on here. If yours are different, you may have accidentally mistyped one of these numbers when you did it in your calculator. So you can go back and double check. I would always make sure you double check these, especially on tests. So I'm going to end the video here, and I'm going to make a new video for frequency tables. So if you need to learn about frequency tables, go ahead and watch that one.